So jazz has this international scope, right? Everyone's playing jazz, everyone's making their own jazz. But there's always kind of this lurking intimidation of, depending on the population, that they don't have access to Black culture or Black American culture. So there's a bit of a sinking feeling that their jazz is not authentic. And, that's an interesting issue for me and an interesting thing raised to me by others because, I'm not Black and I'm not white and I'm not Latin. And, I came through to this music through a lot of the jazz rock fusion, or kind of instrumental soul R&B, like people like Grover Washington, David Sanborn, and the Brecker Brothers, and the Yellow Jackets, and because that was music that also sounded like the music that was being played on Top 40 radio. I was born in 1971. I'm really a child of the 80s in many ways. So that music all made sense. It wasn't like I was listening to Charlie Parker when I was 10 years old. There were plenty of times where I felt like I didn't belong because of the color of my skin. And the industry had no place for me either. They didn't know what to do with an Indian American jazz musician. And a friend of mine was like, why don't you come to Chicago? It's a very healthy scene. You probably play a lot and work a lot, get a lot of experience. And it was a great stepping stone to New York because I got a lot of experience and exposure, but more experience than I would have if I'd come to New York. I'd probably be temping. I'd probably be an expert in Photoshop now if I'd moved to New York, And there I really got to play, and I had a steady Monday night gig. I was writing music. A little local label put out my first album, and I knew stuff. I learned stuff. I learned how to get a gig. I learned how to get a radio station to play your music. I learned a lot of business stuff. And then every band that was coming through from New York, I went to meet them and would take them out for South Indian food or cook for them or something. So when I moved to New York, I knew all these people. Like, oh yeah, you're the guy who took us out for idlis and dosas. I was like, yeah, that was me. Here's my CD. So, I was always thinking about the music and the business together because I saw, in some sort of maybe subconscious way, that the industry was. I didn't predict MP3 and the internet and piracy, but I knew that stuff was going to get harder and harder. It was very clear to me, and the schools are turning out so many proficient musicians. There's a lot more to wade through to make sure you are heard, especially if you have a real personal voice. Now it's more in my DNA. I have to say, like, those first things with Indo-Pak Coalition or Kinsman, which was this collaboration with the Carnatic saxophonist Kadri Gopalnath, I think when I look back on that stuff, even though it's like only 7 years old, 8 years old, I felt like the feeling I had was that I was trying to prove something, I don't know if it comes across in the music, but when I go to those headspaces, I'm like, oh yeah, I felt like you have to play like this because you're trying to prove that you can do all these things. And now I'm like, you know what? They're so embedded. They're just coming out now, and I can relax with it. It's always going to be me.